Chapter 81. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. 81. Another lusty attempt. Concentrate and think, Rena. Tell me something that you found interesting from today's interviews, Ace prompted again, and I could tell that he was being serious about this. How does he expect me to be able to answer him while he's doing these lewd things to me? I think, I began saying before passionate moans overtook my words. You're very sensitive. Ace said with satisfaction. His other hand moved to cup and massage my breast as he continued to pet my clit with his other hand. I could feel his eyes staring down at my face as he watched my face contort into a mask of ecstasy. Let's try again, Rena. Tell me about what you thought of today's interviews, Ace asked me again, and he tried to get me to focus on his words. I think that people value culture. I managed to spit out in between my wild pants. My body felt so unbearably hot, and it was a small miracle that I haven't fainted already. The way Ace touched my body made me feel too good that my mind could no longer function as lust and desire clouded my mind. I began moaning louder as my passion started to take over, my hips thrusting sharply upwards against his hand. I wanted to feel his fingers beating fast and hard into my wet hole until he made me come from his fingers, and then. The heat has probably gotten to you. Maybe I should get you out now, Ace said with some concern in his voice. His hand left my pussy and I almost screamed out in frustration as my pleasure was robbed from me. I wanted him to continue touching me there. Actually, I wanted him to do more than touch my clit. As his hand withdrew from my pussy, the pleasure started to quickly recede as I whimpered from disappointment as if I was heartbroken. Ace's hands were on the side of my hips before he supported and lifted me up until I sat on the side of the jacuzzi with only my legs dipping into the water. It felt cooler to be up from the warm water, but it wasn't too cold. My mind started to clear a little as I took in deep breaths. Maybe Ace was right, the heat may have gotten to me a little too much. That and the pleasure that he was making me experience from his seductive touches. Let's try again, shall we? You should feel better now. So, tell me, what caught your interest that may work as an angle for our storyboard? Ace prompted once again as he stared up into my face. The sight of Ace's handsome face and captivating golden brown eyes staring up at me while he was still in the water of the jacuzzi looked so irresistibly sexy that for a moment I was lost in the depth of his amber eyes. I was even more speechless than before as I struggled to find the words. I think that showing different beliefs may not be a bad thing. I managed to say in a whisper. What else? Ace prompted further. I sucked in a rapid breath when I felt the heat of his hand on my knees, and then he was slowly parting my legs. I moaned his name when I looked down to find him in between my widely spread legs. What else, Rena? Ace repeated his question as he smirked up devilishly at me. Why did he have to be this hot and sexy? I murmured as I tried to tear my eyes and my thoughts away from his sexy face. His teasing hands began stroking my inner thighs, and that made it even harder for me to focus. By that time, I had already figured out that he was doing all of this intentionally to tease and torture me. I hated to admit it, but it was working extremely well. My pussy started to throb with my desire for him again as I felt myself getting wetter and wetter with each of his seductive caresses along the length of my inner thighs. Ace, I whimpered before I had to throw my head back and moan. My fingers dug into the hard floor as I used my arm to support my body upright. The pleasure coursing through my body in waves drove me crazy. My pussy clenched at the sensation of Ace's sucking on my swollen clit. After crying out my pleasure, I managed to glance down to witness Ace burying his face in between my widely spread legs as he continued sucking on my hardened clit. Ace. No. Please, I pleaded for him to stop. The pleasure of his lips sucking and licking on my sensitive seed felt overwhelming, and it felt like I was ready to come at any second. I was quickly losing control of my body and mind as my hips began thrusting upwards, shoving my pussy tantalizingly towards his lips. His large hand caressed my waist before running down its curve to rest at the side of my hips. His tongue snaked out and licked my swollen bud in circular motions as I cried out his name loudly. My lewd panting and moans echoed all around us, and it made me feel so naughty. His hand tightened against the side of my hips before he reached under my ass to cup my buttocks in his large hands. Ah! Ace, ah! I moaned even louder as desire corrupted my brain. My body heated up as the flame of my desires burnt brightly in my throbbing core. The pleasurable ache in my lower abdomen intensified, and I wanted him inside of me to satisfy my need. My pussy got wetter and wetter as he continued to lick and tease my clit. Your pussy got so wet. Do you like it when I lick you? Ace asked seductively as his hazel eyes stared up at my face. I couldn't answer him even if I wanted to. So much pleasure flooded my body that I could no longer form coherent words. Only moans of pleasure left my lips as I begged him for even more pleasure. Ace smirked up at me before he buried his face in between my legs again. To be continued. Chapter 82. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 82. Sweet surrender. This time, his skillful tongue lapped at the juices that have leaked out of my love opening. He ran his tongue expertly along the wet slit in between my legs, making me moan even louder. I couldn't stand it anymore, I wanted more of him. My hands reached down and cupped his head before I tried to push him closer to me. My fingers ran through his dark and wet hair as I thrusted my pussy towards his face invitingly. Ace must have sensed that I needed more, because in the next instance, I felt his hot and wet tongue thrusting boldly into my wet hole. Oh, ah, I cried out with a mix of surprise and pure bliss. I couldn't believe what was happening, but the pleasure from his tongue wiggling inside of my love hole told me that Ace had really penetrated my cunt with his tongue. His tongue was inside of me. Before I could get over my shock, Ace's hands began lifting my hips up a little to angle my pussy the way that he wanted it. I felt the texture of his hot tongue rubbing against my pussy walls as he began thrusting his tongue in and out of my sopping wet hole. My hips jerked at the sensation of his tongue pleasuring my love hole. It felt so good and unlike anything that I had ever experienced before. The heat of his tongue inside of my hole turned me on so much. My legs felt weak, and it felt like my insides had melted and turned into mush. I felt so weak and defenseless as I completely surrendered myself over to him. Ace had me in the palm of his hand, and I didn't want to be anywhere else. When his tongue began thrusting faster in and out of my hole before wriggling around inside of me, I moaned louder than before. Then I had to throw my head back to cry out with my eyes squeezed tightly shut as I tried desperately to deal with the intense pleasure. I'm going to come. I managed to confess in between my ecstatic moans. Ace didn't respond to me in words because his tongue was busy fucking my wet hole while his lips were busy sucking on my love juices. However, I knew that he heard me when he pressed a finger firmly against my sensitive clit before he proceeded to stroke and then pinch on it. The combination of pleasure sent me over the edge, and I came screaming his name as I dug my fingers into his hair. My entire body spasmed and trembled uncontrollably as my pussy clenched around his intruding tongue before I squirted my juices into his awaiting mouth. It was so hot and so sexy that I was turned on by what we were doing. I lost myself completely to my lust and desires as I whimpered like a bitch in heat. Ace sucked on my pussy before licking my juices with his enticing tongue. Ace. I whimpered his name weakly when I felt his tongue gently sliding out of my hole. He lifted his face from my legs before he looked up at me as if to see how I was doing. I was still recovering from the aftermath of my extremely intense climax. My ragged breath made my chest rise up and down, and my mind was still lost and unfocused. When I glanced down at Ace, I found him staring up at me with a look of pure amusement on his face as he studied my reactions closely. His tongue slowly snaked out of his mouth to lick his lips, and I blushed immediately when I recalled the pleasure that his tongue had just given me. I felt so embarrassed that I wasn't sure how to face him anymore. Although my legs felt weak, I tried my best to get up. It was frankly amazing that I could get up and stand on my own 2 feet. My wetness poured out of my hole and began trickling down my inner thighs when I stood up, and a small moan left my lips. My pussy felt so sensitive from just having climaxed, and every step that I took forward made my pussy quiver deep inside. "Where are you going?" Ace asked leisurely from behind me. I heard the sound of splashing water and then footsteps, which made me realize that Ace must have gotten out of the water. It wasn't long before I felt his presence close behind me, but I didn't dare turn to face him. Heat rose to my cheeks, and I began blushing wildly again. Although it wasn't my first time doing something like that, it was my first time doing it in a place like that. Maybe it was because of that, or maybe it was because it was Ace, but I just felt so embarrassed that I wanted to dig a hole and hide away somewhere. "I'm going back," I muttered before quickly walking away. "Wait, Rena," Ace called after me gently. "No, please," I murmured as I continued walking. I felt Ace's presence next to me when he caught up with me, but I wouldn't meet his gaze even though I could tell that his magnificent hazel eyes were watching my face. "Don't walk away from me, Rena," Ace warned sternly. I looked up from the floor to find him standing right in front of me, blocking my escape with his body. "I just want to go back to the room now," I mumbled as I tried to walk past him. Not surprisingly, Ace wouldn't let me get away from him that easily. His hand reached out at astonishing speed to grab my wrist. "I'll take you there," he said coldly before he began pulling me after him out of the room. I found myself sitting on the sofa back in our hotel suite room with nothing but a white robe wrapped around my body. Ace had gone off somewhere after leading me there. My body and mind felt like a mess as I sat there absent-mindedly just staring at the carpeted floor in between my feet. To be continued. Chapter 83. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 83. Lost in him, this is for you. I heard Ace's voice whispering softly as he crouched down in front of me. His face came into my field of vision before I felt something cold and wet against my cheek. Glancing to the side, I could see that he had pressed a can of cold fruit juice against my cheek. "Thank you," I murmured when he placed the cold can into my hands. "Feeling better?" he asked in a voice so gentle that my heart clenched hard in my chest. I just nodded my head at him as I tried to avoid his gaze. "What is wrong with me? I just couldn't understand myself." "No, I don't know. Sorry," I murmured as if close to tears. "Why am I so confused? He was so rough with me and then he's so kind and gentle with me. It made me feel so confused and I didn't know how I should be feeling anymore. Ace, he's so hard for me to understand. He does all that to me and I melt just at his touch. He gave me so much pleasure that I cried out and begged him for more. He seduced me and I found myself willingly dancing to his tune. Then I get mad at him for reasons that I don't even understand. What do I want from him? What do I want from myself? When he smiles at me and when he apologizes, I can't find it in me to get mad at him at all. Perhaps it was precisely because of that I was upset and mad at myself instead. "You should go to bed. It's late," Ace said calmly. Before I could react, Ace had scooped me up into his arms again. It was amazing how he had so much energy to handle me so effortlessly. Without another word, Ace carried me into the bedroom and placed me gently onto the bed. My body froze when my back hit the bed as I thought of Ace getting into bed with me and what may follow. To my surprise, instead of getting on the bed with me, Ace just turned and headed for the bedroom door. I propped myself up into a sitting position on the bed as I stared at his back. "Ace." I called out his name questioningly before I could stop myself. Ace made a sound in response. "Where are you going?" I asked softly. "Nowhere. I'm going to sleep on the couch outside." "Good night," Ace replied curtly. The door closed behind him, and I was the only one left in the bedroom. After blinking my eyes rapidly a few times in surprise at Ace's sudden departure, I began preparing for bed. It had been a long day and I could use some rest. Catching up on sleep was definitely one of the things on my top priority list of things to do. I switched off the lights and laid on the king-sized bed with my eyes closed as I tried to relax and go to sleep. I must have fallen asleep sometime after turning off the lights because I found myself in dreamland. It was strange how I knew that I was dreaming and how the body just goes along with the mind as it dreams about strange or random things. The dream that I was seeing was definitely one of those random dreams. Just like many dreams that I've had recently, I saw Ace in my dream. I've been seeing him so often in my dreams now that it no longer surprised me. Ace sat in the middle of a grass field, and it was bright and sunny. The weather seemed perfect for a picnic, and for some reason, Ace had a puppy on his lap and he was playing with it. I watched from where I was standing as Ace began stroking the puppy's head as the puppy wagged its tail happily. I had no idea why I was dreaming about this, but in my dream, I could feel my overwhelming happiness and joy. Suddenly, the sunny blue sky turned dark and rain clouds started taking over. It didn't take long for it to rain and then it poured. The wind turned harsh, and the roar of thunder resonated all around us. Huge raindrops fell onto me and soaked my clothes. The puppy started to panic from the loud sound of thunder. After struggling, the puppy freed itself and began running away. Ace got up and ran towards me with a worried look on his face. Suddenly, I could feel his panic and I got scared of losing the puppy. Although I knew that it was nothing more than a dream, the tightness in my chest felt real as I struggled to contain my worries. Ace began saying something, but the sound of the rain drowned out his voice and I couldn't hear what he was saying at all. Suddenly, pain shot through my head like I was starting to have a migraine. Ace. The next thing I knew, my eyes had already sprung open and I was staring into the darkness right in front of me. The bedroom was dark and silent. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness and soon I could make out some outlines. I sighed softly to myself when I realized that I must have had that dream because I was worrying about Ace. He gave up the bed so that I could get my rest, which meant that he had to sleep on the sofa. I wonder how he's doing right now. Is he sleeping well? The digital clock next to the bed showed that it was around 3 a.m., which meant that I didn't sleep for that long. It was late in the night, but there were many hours left before morning would arrive. Although I knew that I should try my best to go to sleep, my worry for Ace took over and I had to admit that I probably won't be able to fall asleep. Karina, what are you doing? Why am I doing this? To be continued. Chapter 84. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 84. Me as his body pillow. Regardless of what my mind thought, my body had already started moving on its own as my arms threw the blanket off my body before I swung my legs off the side of the bed. I was on my feet and making my way towards the door in no time at all. I tiptoed towards the door, afraid to make any sound that might wake Ace up. He might be sleeping. Actually, I hoped that he was sound asleep. If I can just see that he's alright, then I can probably go back to sleep with a peace of mind. Careful not to make any loud noises, I slowly opened the bedroom door and made my way into the adjoining living room where Ace was sleeping on the sofa. Thankfully, the floor was carpeted and that helped to soften the sounds of my footsteps. It was quite dark in the living room, but not as dark as in the bedroom thanks to some light shining in through the curtains to the side of the room. The room was so silent that all I could hear was the sound of my own heart racing inside my chest. I was so nervous, and my nerves were all on edge as I inched closer to the sofa where Ace was sleeping. My eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I could make out the outlines of everything pretty well. The closer I got to the sofa, the louder my heartbeat rang in my ears. When I came to stand right beside the sofa, I could see Ace sleeping on it with a blanket over his body. I couldn't really make out the details of his face because it was too dark for that, but from how still and silent he was, I came to the conclusion that he must be sleeping. Relief flooded my body as I slowly breathed out a breath that I hadn't realized that I had been anxiously holding. Suddenly, I felt a little less guilty about taking up his offer to take the bed. Ace must have led a pampered and sheltered life as suited to someone born in such a wealthy family, so I wasn't sure if he could fall asleep on a sofa like this. I guess I was worried for nothing. Unlike me, I can fall asleep anywhere at all. With the living standards that I had growing up, the less fussy I was, the better. Now that I've seen for myself that Ace seems to be sleeping soundly, I was relieved and ready to make my way back to bed to get some sleep myself. Just when I turned around to leave, I felt something warm around my wrist. Ah! I cried out quite loudly in my surprise and panic. Reflexively, I began yanking my wrist back as I tried to get free. You really love to invade my sleeping space, don't you? Ace asked sleepily. Did I wake him? It was then that it registered on my brain that the warmth and pressure that I felt around my wrist must be Ace's hand gripping it. Ace, I'm sorry. Did I wake you? I asked in a regrettable breathless whisper. Instead of replying to my question, Ace yanked on my arm, and I found myself losing my balance before I fell onto him. Everything happened so fast, that I wasn't sure if I had fallen or if he had pulled me on top of him. Perhaps it was a combination of both of those things. His strong arms wrapped around my body as I felt the heat of his body against the length of mine. I felt the hardness of his muscular body against mine as his arms hugged me tightly to him. My body stiffened in shock at the suddenness of his surprise attack. How did I end up sleeping on him again? Ace. I called his name and was even more surprised when my voice came out as a soft whimper. You truly love to sneak up on me when I'm sleeping, don't you? Ace teased as his hands began stroking my back sensually. He was probably referring to the time when I invaded the rooftop which he considered his private sleeping space. This was very different, though. I just wanted to check that he was all right. It's not like that. I began explaining before I realized how ridiculous my reason would sound. You were just what? He asked as his hands began stroking the side of my waist. Surprisingly, I found his gentle caresses calming and comforting rather than disturbing, and my body slowly began to relax on top of him. I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to fall asleep on the couch like this. So I replied before trailing off shyly. So, you were worried about me. Is that it? Ace asked as if he wanted to make sure that he understood me correctly. Well, that I guess. I was forced to admit in a small voice. I could sense Ace smiling although I couldn't see his face that clearly. I always sleep better with a body pillow. They don't seem to have one here, so what do you say about being my body pillow for the night? Ace suggested. Huh? What? I said in disbelief. I'll sleep so much better if I can hold you like this, Ace murmured in a seductive drawl. Ace. Wait, I mumbled. Ace shifted his body to the side slightly before he positioned me down onto the sofa next to him. He turned to his side and wrapped his arms around me. I felt his warm breath against my neck as he snuggled his face there and began breathing in my scent deeply. Ace moaned softly as his arms tightened around my body. My body froze at his sudden change in position and how tightly he was holding me. I could feel his body heat everywhere along the length of our touching bodies. As if we were not yet close enough with our bodies pressed up against each other, Ace lifted his leg and placed it over my hips to hug me even closer against him. My eyes widened when I realized that he truly intended to use me as his human body pillow for the night. To be continued. Chapter 85. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 85. Inviting him to bed. I blushed wildly in the darkness at my own thought that it felt so comfortable to snuggle with him like this. Ace sighed softly, and the way that his hand softly stroked the back of my head told me that he was enjoying this as well. After a while of laying like that silently, I felt like I was about to drift off into sleep. Won't we wake up with muscles aches or back pain if we slept the remaining of the night like this on the sofa in this position? It didn't seem like Ace was willing to let me go at all. A shameful thought occurred me and I spent a few minutes debating to myself on what to do with it. If we're going to be sleeping pressed up against each other like this for the remaining of the night anyways, we might as well. My train of thought was interrupted when Ace began placing small tender kisses against my neck before he trailed those kisses upwards to my cheek. His kisses were more playful than seductive, and I reacted by squirming in his arms. "Can you really fall asleep like this?" I asked in wonder. "I can," Ace replied with certainty. "If we're going to be sleeping together anyways, then that I can't believe that I'm really going to say this. Should we go to the bed?" I asked very softly and very hesitantly. Ace's lips froze on my neck, and I could tell that he was surprised by my unexpected invitation. I wasn't sure if Ace was taking this the wrong way or not, but just to make sure that he didn't completely misunderstand my intention. "BDNV, no. I don't mean it like that," I quickly clarified before he got any funny ideas about my proposal. "Like what?" Ace teased as if he had no idea what I was talking about. I sighed and decided to just shut up before I got myself into any more trouble. To my surprise, Ace let go of me and sat up on the sofa. "Come, Rena. Let's go to the bed," Ace urged in a seductive drawl as he reached for my hands. Ace pulled me up to my feet with ease while I ended up slightly disorientated from being suddenly pulled to my feet. Without waiting any further, Ace led me back to the bedroom. "Ace." I called his name in slight protest. "Don't worry. I won't do anything to you tonight," Ace promised casually. Everything would have worked out fine if he hadn't added the word "tonight" to the end of that phrase. Ace snuggled closer to me on the bed, and I could feel his heat against my back along with his soft breath against my ear. His scent enveloped me along with his strong arms as he hugged me against his body. How our bodies fitted well together felt so natural and comfortable, and it wasn't long before my eyelids started to feel very heavy. True to his words of promise, Ace didn't try anything else with me that night, and I ended up sleeping very well in his arms until morning came along with the start of another day with him. Rung was there to greet us at the hotel lobby at the appointed time. Ace chatted to him in such a friendly way that made it look like they had known each other for years instead of having met only yesterday. I was pleasantly surprised at how down-to-earth and casual Ace could be. It was a stark difference to the impression that I had of him before I got to spend time with him. He seemed cold, arrogant, and extremely distant when I knew him as just the CEO of the company that I work for. Now that I see him chatting and laughing along with Rung's jokes, he seemed so much more human. I couldn't keep my eyes off of him as his face transformed into various animated expressions. The way he was dressed also added to the casual feel about him that I wasn't at all used to. Instead of his formal business suit attire that he normally wore at the office, Ace had a simple white long-sleeve shirt on with a pair of basic light blue jeans. Despite the cold that usually set in closer to sunset, Ace didn't seem bothered by the cold and had the sleeves of his shirt rolled up around his elbow. "Rena." Ace called my name questioningly. I blinked my eyes rapidly when I realized that my name had been called. My mind snapped back to reality from spacing out and thinking too much about Ace. I offered him a small smile to show him that he had my attention now. "We should be arriving soon. Don't forget anything in the car, okay? We might have to walk a little to the farm," Ace informed me casually. "Right. Okay," I replied. Quickly, I checked that I had everything that we would need. Ace and Rung had helped to provide most of everything, including pens, notebook, a voice recorder, and other items that we may need to record our visit to the farm. I had to say that I walked in quite mentally prepared for what I was about to see. After watching multiple videos of dog meat farms in poor and unhygienic conditions, I thought that I had formulated quite a clear picture of what we were about to see. After walking a couple of minutes down a slightly narrow road from where Rung had parked the car, we arrived at the front gates of what was supposed to be the first dog meat farm for our visit for the day. Rung told us that he had arranged for our visit beforehand, so the farm was expecting us. The farm didn't look big, and it was clear from how run down the facility was that it was a locally run small business. Just standing in front of the gates, I could smell the animals and their excretion. "You, okay?" Ace asked softly as he reached for my hand and held it softly in his. To be continued. Chapter 86. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 86 leaning on him. Yes, of course, I replied as I tried to keep my voice from shaking. We haven't even gone inside yet, so I knew that this was nothing. Being a dog and animal lover did not work in my favor at all for this case because it made me feel more sensitive to what I was about to see than normal. However, this was work, and don't people say that understanding the problem is the first step to solving it? Suddenly, a man with gray hair approached the gate. Rung quickly greeted the man in their local language, and the man laughed carefreely as he unlocked the gates for us and welcomed us in. Ace and I both smiled at the man in greeting before we were led inside. There was a small unkept yard between the gate and the main building. The place seemed to resemble more of a single-story warehouse than a building, and it was clear that that was where the dogs were being kept. Rung continued conversing with the man who I assumed was the owner of the farm before he turned to smile at us reassuringly. We knew that he would soon translate things to us, so we spent the time just looking around the place. The sounds of dogs barking filled our ears even before we entered the warehouse. I flinched at the thought of just imagining how many dogs were kept in there. The owner opened the door to the warehouse, and I found myself inside a dog meat farm for the first time of my life. The scene in front of me gave me goosebumps and a sense of depression like I have never felt before in my life. Countless dogs were locked up in crowded cages that seemed too small for them to share. Endless rows of cages lined the warehouse, and many were stacked on top of each other to ensure that the warehouse could fit as many cages and dogs as possible. The smell was something that I knew I would not forget for a long time, even though I truly wanted to. There were many staff walking around the place busy with their work of feeding, cleaning, and other activities that I couldn't quite comprehend. So, this is where they keep the dogs? I asked him, and most of the dogs are captured and sold here, while they also raise some just for sale. Every week or twice a week, an agent will come with a truck to pick up the dogs. They sell it live. None of the dogs are butchered here, Rung explained as he waved with his hand for us to follow him deeper into the warehouse. I felt like I had seen more than enough from where I was standing, and my feet felt rooted to the ground as I hesitated to take a single step forward. Ace must have sensed my extreme discomfort before he gave my hand a comforting squeeze. Rena, that you don't have to go in if you don't want to. Do you want to wait outside? Ace asked as he bent down until his face was at my level. I could see the care in his hazel brown eyes as his brows drew together in concern for me. Honesty, I didn't want to take another step forward into that place at all. However, I also knew that that was no good. I came all the way here, I can't exactly back out now just because I was taken aback by seeing the harsh reality in front of me. Can you wait a moment please, Rung? I'll take Rena back outside. Ace turned to tell Rung. I probably looked like such a fool and a coward. This is for work. I came here exactly for this. If I don't do this, how are we going to produce an award-winning commercial? Pain shot through my lower lip, and I realized that I had started chewing hard on my lip. No. I'm fine. I'll go in with you, I told him while trying to keep my voice from shaking from fear. Are you sure? Ace asked. Yes. Let's go. I replied before I could change my mind. Ace seemed hesitant but decided to lead me inside after taking my hand into this. His warm hand around mine felt comforting, and I appreciated his presence close to me. Without realizing it at first, I had probably started relying on Ace as a source of emotional support. Rung was already in the center of the warehouse conversing animatedly with the farm's owner. He seemed to be enjoying this trip and this job of his a lot. This way guys. Rung called out to us as he waved a hand above his head. Anything interesting? Ace asked in wonder. I pressed my body close to Ace as I tried to control my own fears. This isn't the time to freak out, I told myself repeatedly. The dogs in the cages barked loudly at us as their eyes stared and glared at us. It took a lot of self-control to keep my mind from wandering into the dark thoughts that these dogs will soon turn into meat. The thought made my body shiver. Ace must have sensed my fear because he wrapped an arm around my waist and started stroking the side of my waist. I turned to smile at him a little to ensure him that I was fine. Rung continued talking to the farm owner for a little while longer before turning to address us, and I knew that our briefing was about to start. All right. So, there are around 500-ish dogs kept here. Every week or so they sell around half of those. A trader will come to collect the dogs via trucks, and then they will be led to a butchery site where the animals are processed. The meat is then distributed to various local markets across the countries based on orders, Rung explained without going into the gory details. To be continued. Chapter 87. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 87 Controversial feelings. Ace followed up with many questions while I concentrated on operating the voice recorder. The dogs were barking loudly, so I wasn't sure if we would be able to hear the words properly or not over the sound of the dogs barking. I felt extremely uncomfortable with the dogs staring at us and couldn't wait to get out of there. Follow us this way. He'll show us around the farm a little more, Rung told us. We proceeded to follow the farm's owner out the door on the other side of the warehouse from where we had entered. The back door led out to a yard where there were much larger cages that were now empty outside. These cages are for storing temporary stock before the traders come to pick them up, Rung explained before going into more details of the pickup and delivery schedule. Can you ask him what the farm owner thinks of this business? Is the demand for dog meat growing or shrinking? What does he think of people's opinion of this business? Ace asked curiously. Now that we were outside of the warehouse and I could no longer see the dogs, I felt slightly better. The fresh air outside really helped, although the smell of the animals was still heavy in the air. Rung translated Ace's questions for the farm owner. The man nodded before answering the questions. He says that he thinks that there is nothing wrong with what he is doing. He thinks that dog meat farms are normal, just like chicken farms. There are many local chicken and pig farms that are run with similar standards to his farm, so he doesn't understand the issues at all. Demand has been the same for him because his farm is small, so he doesn't have any problem selling all his dogs, Rung translated before continuing to listen a little more to the farm owner. What did he say just now? Ace prompted. He says that he knows that younger generations that love dogs think that this is barbaric. He isn't bothered by that thought. He says that as long as there is demand for dog meat, someone has to provide it. If it isn't him, it'll end up being someone else in the business, Rung replied with his translation. Right. Thank you. Let's go on to the next farm, Ace said before he turned to bow in thanks to the farm owner. I did the same to show my appreciation, and the man smiled back at me kindly. After interacting with the farm owner, I had to say that he was kind and gentle, just like any nice uncle that you would run into. Even though he is involved in a business that is viewed as cruel, he is still very much human. The picture of the people behind this trade being evil didn't quite fit what I was seeing for myself. After wrapping up our work at the first farm, we headed to the second farm for the day. In the end, we managed to visit 4 farms. The schedule was really packed, but we somehow made it through. Ace was very strategic with the farms that he got Rung to contact and take us to. There was a good mix of various farm sizes, ranging from small local farms ran by one sole owner and some staff, such as the first one that we visited, to larger farms that resembled more or a formal industry with many employees and operating at much a larger scale. It was amazing to see how big the dog meat trade really is in this country and how normal the people who worked in these farms thought that it was. It didn't seem like everyone who worked in these farms consumed dog meat, but they viewed it as normal for some people to have the preference. By the time we got back into the car to head back to the hotel, I had started developing very mixed feelings about the subject compared to before. What I saw at the farm still felt as shocking as ever. As time passed by and we visited more farms, I got a little used to seeing the animals and how they were treated and kept in cages. However, that didn't mean that it became any easier for me to swallow. Sitting in the car next to Ace made me realize just how tired and drained I was from the trip, and it wasn't mainly physical, I felt drained emotionally. You look tired. Let's call it a day and relax back at the hotel, Ace suggested as his fingers stroked the back of my hand gently. I watched absent-mindedly as his beautiful fingers moved gently on the back of my hand. After looking up at this face, I could see him smiling at me warmly and my heart clenched tightly in my chest. On top of dealing with the work, I had to deal with this attractive man here as well. I need to find a way to get some proper rest, I felt so tired. That would be nice. I replied in agreement. Rung quickly excused himself after dropping us off at the hotel lobby. I thanked him and waved as he drove away. I really liked Rung and how helpful he was to us on top of his positive attitude. I doubt that our interviews with the various people would have gone as smoothly as it did if we didn't have Rung. The topic and questions that we asked were quite controversial, so it wouldn't come as a surprise if people might find it offensive. Rung had a genius way of laughing his way through those awkward and difficult patches of conversations from my observations. Let's rest up a bit and order some room service food, Ace suggested as he led me by the hand towards the elevators. I followed after him willingly without much energy to resist. Since the schedule was busy, we didn't have time to stop for a proper lunch. I didn't have any issues with the food that Rung got for us, though. However, after seeing what I had seen, I didn't have much of an appetite and pretty much ended up skipping on having lunch. My body was paying for skipping on a meal very dearly now because I felt so hungry and low on energy. My tummy wouldn't stop churning around and I prayed that it wouldn't growl so loud that Ace would hear it. That would be the most embarrassing thing ever. To be continued. Chapter 88. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 88. His genius idea. Let's see what food they have on the menu. If there's nothing that you fancy, we can always go to one of the restaurants in the hotel, Ace told me as he offered me the menu book. Thanks. I thanked him softly as I took the menu from his hand. While I was sitting on the sofa in the living room of our hotel suite, Ace took out his laptop before sitting down close to me on the sofa. I glanced over to find that he had already started working on something. Suddenly, I felt bad for leisurely choosing food for my dinner while he was busy working. Ace, did I ask there's something that I can help out with? I asked. Yes, order some food for yourself and order some for me too, Ace replied without shifting his eyes off the laptop screen. Okay, I'll do that. I mumbled. After picking out a few items that should work, I dialed the operator via the hotel phone to place my orders. Can you list out some insights and potential angles for the storyline, please? Ace told me while his eyes still stared at his laptop screen. Yes, I'll do that, I replied. Let's discuss it in 15 minutes, I've got some ideas too. Ace said without looking my way. He seemed busy. I guess apart from this project it wasn't unusual for him to have other projects or work on hand. I stood up and took out my notebook and the voice recorder before taking a seat at the table. Soon enough Ace followed me and took the seat next to me before his attention returned to his laptop again. We worked side by side in silence. He sorted out his work while I listened through some of the interviews using headphones. It was hard for me to think of any creative angles for the storyboard. Honestly, every time I listened to the interview, I just felt depressed about the topic. Showing a very depressing story probably won't be good enough to get the message across. There's also the issue of preserving culture, which gave me pause. If we support this cause and campaign for donations to end the dog meat trade, that will mean that we would be choosing to end some traditions and culture, right? The worst part was that tradition and culture wasn't even ours in the first place. Did we have the right to do such a thing? Is there a middle path solution somewhere that is acceptable by both sides? If there is, how do we push for it, and would that lead to a weak messaging in the campaign? Let's say. I'm done. Now, tell me your ideas, Ace ordered as he turned to face me. That was fast. Time flew by much faster than I thought when I was deep in thought. Seemed like my time was up and now Ace wanted some answers. That I don't have anything solid, but I do have some thoughts on this. I think that it might be good if we can find some middle ground. I began explaining. Ace gave me a curious look and I knew that he didn't fully understand. What kind of middle ground are you thinking of? He asked. Well, it seemed like all the local people that we interviewed mentioned about traditions and culture, so I was thinking that if we campaigned to end all dog meat trade then we would essentially be ending their traditional practices as well. I voiced my concern. So, you're scared of killing some old customs and traditions? Ace asked. Well, yes. The thing is, we'll be campaigning to kill customs and traditions that is not ours simply because our values are different. Dogs are purely pets for us, but for people of other cultures, dogs can be food. After listening to them, it's hard to draw the line that I think. I tried my best to explain. If we present a middle ground of compromise, what would that be? Ace asked with interest. I'm not sure. Maybe something like raising money to improve the conditions and practices in the dog meat farms. I voiced hesitantly. In other words, we're not campaigning for the end of the trade at all. We're saying it's acceptable as long as the farms are clean, and the dogs are treated well in the farms. Ace asked to make sure that he understood. Something like that. That's all that I can think of right now. I know that the message is weak and very confusing. I admitted weakly. I agree. It's very weak. If I find it confusing, the audience will too. I doubt a messaging as weak as this would lead anyone to donate money to the cause. Most donators will want to end the trade, they probably won't pay for anything else, especially if it seems to suggest that their money will be used to support the continuation of the trade, Ace pointed out sternly. Right, that I had not really thought about that. I guess you're right. I'm sorry. I mumbled. Everyone that we interviewed seemed to think that the dog meat trade industry is in its sunset phase anyways. New generations are treating dogs as pets even in this country. The tradition of eating dogs hasn't been widely adopted by the younger generation. Over time, the practice will probably disappear along with the old tradition, just like any other old traditions that has lost popularity as time went by. Ace stated his point of view calmly. Do you have any ideas? I asked. What about something that shoots down two birds with one stone? Ace suggested with a smile. Like what? I asked. He certainly had me interested in his proposal already, and I haven't even heard it yet. Ending the dog meat trade and all the animal cruelty associated with it while showing cultural transition of the newer generation embracing change. The change in the role of dogs in society might be a nice note to end on. We can show the natural progression in terms of culture while still sticking to the cause of ending the dog meat trade, Ace suggested before smiling confidently at me. To be continued. Chapter 89. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 89. Seductive invitation sounds much better than my idea. I admitted in awe. You like it? That's great. Ace said with a grin my way. Yeah, that I really like it. I mumbled a little shyly. Can I bother you to draw up a strawman storyline and storyboard based on my idea just now? Ace asked. Of course. I'll start working on it right away. I agreed excitedly. We finally have a direction for this. I truly liked his idea and I bet that so will the audience and the committee. On top of that, I couldn't help but feel honored to be tasked with drafting a storyline based on his idea. It's late. You can start tomorrow or something. Ace told me calmly. No. I'll start right now. I replied before getting up from my seat to grab my laptop. Better strike the iron when it's hot. Come to bed, Rena. Ace coaxed softly from behind me. I shifted in my seat and felt soreness shoot through my shoulders and then the muscles of my back. This must be the result of sitting in front of my laptop for hours since my meeting with Ace ended. I felt his strong arms wrap around me from behind before I could turn to face him. He smelled of soap, so he must have just showered. Ace. I whispered his name in slight surprise at his closeness. I could feel his warm breath against my ear and the heat of his body against my back. His words reminded me of the events of last night and how we spent the night together in bed. Although he didn't do anything naughty to me last night in bed, the thought still brought a rush of heat to my cheeks. Stop working already. Come to bed. Ace repeated again invitingly. I glanced at the laptop screen in front of me as my incomplete work greeted my sight. It wasn't like I had expected to complete everything tonight, but I had thought that I would make more progress than I did. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Ace's idea was brilliant, but it was also complex and hard for me to capture in a storyline. It required me to think and adapt his idea into a flow that would captivate and engage the audience. That was my job, and I wasn't sure if I was living up to his expectations of me or not. Without realizing it at first, this task brought with it a lot more pressure on me. I'm nowhere near done, so maybe I should work on it a little more. I said before I let out a small sigh. Why are you such a workaholic? Are you always like this? Ace asked a little teasingly. Well. I mumbled. No need to answer that. I bet you are. Enough working for tonight. This is a direct order from your CEO, Ace ordered in his authoritative voice. He's my CEO all right. If you say so. I replied hesitantly. I wasn't sure if he should be exerting his authority this way, but it still brought a little smile to my lips. Great. Bedtime. Ace declared happily. I let out yelp as he spun my chair around. His hand grabbed mine at lightning speed and I found myself up on my feet in no time at all after he had pulled me up to my feet. I mumbled. Since Ace took the sofa last night, I thought that it would only be fair if I slept on the sofa tonight. I don't think that it would bother my sleep at all, so it wasn't a big deal for me. Let's go to bed already. Ace said impatiently. Wait. Let me sleep on the sofa tonight. You can take the bed. There's no need to worry about me, I quickly told him. Ace's hazel eyes narrowed at me dangerously. Did I say something wrong just now? Before I could ask him what I said wrong, Ace shook his head in clear disapproval. I let out another cry when Ace suddenly hoisted my body up into his arms with ease. My eyes widened as I stared up at Ace's attractive face in shock. He truly never listens to me or any of my protests. Ace. I called his name pleadingly. We slept together in bed already last night. Why can't we do the same tonight? Ace asked, but it didn't seem like he was interested in an answer. That's that I was just scared that you wouldn't be comfortable on the sofa. If it's me, I'll have no problem sleeping there. I tried my best to explain. Well, I'm afraid you won't be comfortable on the sofa either. Plus, I like sleeping with you, Ace said so casually. After walking from the living room into the bedroom and closing the door behind us, Ace placed me gently on the bed. I knew that sleep wasn't what he had in mind when he got on top of me. Ace. I cried out his name in a panic. This is just at so sudden. If you scream too loudly, they'll just think that I'm showing you such a good time. Ace teased before he smirked playfully at me. His face is so sexy and the desire dancing in the depth of his eyes looked so hot that I felt like he could melt me with his intense gaze. Ace's amber eyes seemed to shine like a predator's in the dim light of the bedroom. Ace. I whispered his name before I moaned. Ace buried his face in the crook of my neck before his lips began planting small sensual kisses against my sensitive skin. It felt so exciting and so pleasurable that I felt goosebumps form all over my body just from his kiss. His wet tongue slipped out from between his lips and lapped at my neck. The warm wetness of his tongue trailed a line down the side of my neck while I moaned his name. Just stay still, Rena. Good girl, that I'll do the rest. Ace whispered seductively into my ear, and I felt my restraints slipping another knot. To be continued. Chapter 90. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 90 can't hold back, I moaned my protest into his kiss when his lips captured mine. He kissed me and my mind immediately grew hazy as desire started building up deep inside of my core. His lips teased mine before his wet tongue thrusted deftly into my mouth and began tasting me. His tongue explored my mouth before engaging my tongue in a passionate dance while I made small whimpering sounds. His hands began exploring the curves of my body starting from my waist before slipping upwards. My back arched upwards when his large hands found my breasts and began massaging them softly. His touch felt so pleasurable on my womanly flesh. My core started throbbing with need as a pleasurable ache began forming in the pit of my stomach. Once again, my body began reacting to him without reserve and it wasn't long before I began kissing him back hungrily. I loved the taste of his kisses and his scent as it filled my senses and made me desire him more. Ace broke our kiss just enough to pull the white robe that he had on completely off his body. My eyes fell on his sexy naked form as my eyes took in his well-formed muscles. My hands itched with my desire to run my hands all along the muscles of his naked body. I wanted to touch him. "Ah, Ace," I moaned when his hands began undressing me. His tugged and pulled on my clothes roughly and I could sense his impatience and desire for me. I helped him by lifting my arms and my hips off the bed in turn until he had completely stripped me. Things were moving fast to match the intense desire that was burning wildly inside us both. I tried to cover my naked breasts with my hands when I lay completely naked under his intense gaze on the bed. "Remove your hands, Rena. Let me get my fill of you," Ace urged seductively as his hands started to peel my hands away from my naked womanly mounds. "Ace." I whimpered his name weakly. My core throbbed with the heat of my desire, and I couldn't wait for him to touch my naked skin directly. Soon, I got my wish. Ace pressed his body on top of mine, and I moaned as I felt the pleasure of his heated skin against my own. His hard muscles pressed up against my softer body. I never knew that the weight of another person on top of me could feel this good. My lips moaned his name repeatedly as his hands began stroking my hips before moving up to cup and grope my breasts again. The twin perks of my breasts hardened to his touch. My nipples grew erect as it stood up to beg for his loving attention. His large hands massaged my breasts while I whimpered and thrusted my chest up against his hands. "Ace, ah," I cried out loudly at the intense pleasure coursing through my body. His hot wet lips engulfed my nipple and began sucking hard on them while lapping at the hardened tip with his skillful tongue. I had never felt so much pleasure from my breasts being played with before. It felt so good that I felt like I could really come just from him pleasuring my breasts. His lips let go of my swollen nipple before paying the same loving attention to my other nipple while I moaned my lust. His hand quickly moved down my body until he began parting my legs wide apart for him. My legs felt weak, and my mind was consumed by lust. I did not hesitate to part my legs open widely for him before thrusting my hips upwards, shoving my pussy up wantonly from the bed invitingly. So much for wanting to sleep separately for the night. "Sorry, Rena. But I can't hold back 2 nights in a row," Ace whispered in a voice dripping with lust. "Ah," I moaned lewdly. His finger caressed up its way until they arrived at the wetness in between my legs. I closed my eyes and moaned as raw pleasure began taking over me at the sensation of his fingers stroking my flooded love entrance. Ace ran his fingertips up and down my wet slit before pinching my swollen and sensitive clit teasingly. He made my hips squirm from the tantalizing pleasure. I thrusted my hips wildly against his fingers as I attempted to rub my clit against his fingers for heightened pleasure. "Ah, Ace," I moaned his name again. His fingers thrusted suddenly and deeply into my wet cunt, and I screamed my pleasure. It felt so good for my pussy to be stretched and filled like this. So satisfying. "You're flooded down here. I guess you can't hold yourself back either," Ace teased with a chuckle. Without giving me any more pleasure from his fingers, he withdrew them out of my hole after making sure that I was adequately wet and ready for his thick cock. I didn't mind moving on to the main dish right away. I couldn't wait to feel his hard and gigantic cock ramming all the way into my hole either. Ace. Please, I pleaded for his cock to enter me. I'll make you come till you can't come anymore, don't you worry, Rena, Ace continued teasing me in his deep seductive voice. Ace retreated from me, and I opened my eyes wide in confusion. I saw Ace take out a pack of condom and realized that I had forgotten all about that. Thankfully, Ace still had his wits about him because I didn't have any left on me. Put this on me, Ace instructed as he tossed the condom pack towards me. Slowly, I sat up as my hands automatically started tearing at the pack. My eyes fell to the thick and long upstanding pole in between his legs, and I gulped. I can't believe something so enormous could fit inside of me. My hands shook slightly when I felt his eyes on me. Carefully, I placed the condom at his tip before slowly rolling it down the length of his hot cock. To be continued.